But let's dig in, starting with OpenAI going after the enterprise market. Obviously, they are the biggest name in AI right now, other than NVIDIA. Those two are one, two. I'm not sure what the order is, but OpenAI going after the enterprise market more deeply. What do you think about that as someone who works with CIOs pretty deeply?
So on the one hand, not surprising. I mean, everyone has always known from day one that at least in their no longer really not-for-profit era, that OpenAI was not just about ChatGPT, and all of the primary use cases for AI are in the enterprise in some fashion. So no surprise on one level. I think what is surprising to me is the method that it's a sort of direct approach. The whole partnership with Microsoft, in at least in my view, was supposed to be about the entryway into the enterprise, amongst other things. So, they've definitely been doing things like opening up their API and building out partnership programs. And so that's sort of what I expected is the pathway. And this report says that they have 200 people right now dedicated to enterprise sales, which encompasses sales and support and the whole bit. So it's a really small piece at the onset. Um, and frankly, despite all their funding, ramping up to go after the enterprise in earnest is an endeavor. It's not something for the faint of heart. So,
Mhm.
to me, this has had me scratching my head more than anything. So not surprising. They certainly threw out some numbers about deep penetration. I take those with a big grain of salt, right? In terms of, yeah, no, there's no question that everyone everywhere, including employees all over the enterprise, are using ChatGPT, but to what extent are we really seeing enterprise adoption directly? So, it's on the one hand very unsurprising, on the other hand head scratching in terms of what is their end game and how does this affect, say, their partnership with Microsoft. And in fairness, I should say, Microsoft is making it very clear with all of their investments. There's a new one. I guess I don't know if we're supposed to be talking about it now because it just came out, I think, today. But a new $1.5 billion investment in a AI company out of the Emirates. So I mean, clearly Microsoft is also not like just having one partner at this dance. So I guess why should OpenAI not go after the enterprise directly? But it's still like what is their real intention here?
Yes, OpenAI's famous leadership blowup recently showed that every startup is inherently unstable. But this Wall Street Journal article by Bell Lynn, I think one of the interesting things that showed up is how it's from the story is how quickly OpenAI is going towards the enterprise. It reminds me a little bit of when the Apple iPhone started going enterprise, and it was not an immediate process because Apple had made the purchase price process completely consumer to start with, to the extent that just when the iPhone first came out, it was impossible for companies to buy iPhones in bulk. You had to buy as an individual, and each phone had to be assigned to an individual. And it took a couple of years, honestly, for Apple to figure out first how to enable bulk purchases that mattered, or bulk support that mattered, and then develop things like Apple Care for the enterprise, to actually support the level of enterprise IT management that we associate with all of our endpoints and technologies. And I think that OpenAI is about to come in for an unexpected world of hurt as they start figuring out the nuts and bolts of IT support that we take for granted for every technology that comes into the business world.
Well, and there's a whole other factor which we haven't talked about, and that is this whole AI fatigue that is already setting in, and people are already bristling. I've had CIOs, directly sort of complain about the cost of, say, Microsoft Copilot or
Mhm.
any of them. Adobe just introduced their AI chatbot for Acrobat, and it's I think $5 or $10 a month, and it's like it does not take a whole lot of back of the envelope math to figure out that this thing can explode really crazily. And so while they obviously have first mover advantage, if I'm a CIO, I'm looking at where do I place these strategic bets, and I'm not sure this is where I go. I think you're right. I think they're in a world of hurt of across the spectrum of how difficult enterprise sales cycles are, how difficult enterprise customers can be from a support and administration expectations. I
Mhm.
think there's definitely going to be this issue with fatigue. So I think that there's this is, I think, always been sort of the thing that, despite all the hype that we haven't really talked about when it comes to OpenAI, is that I've never felt like they had a really long-term sustainable business model. I mean, we'll see if they simply make their business as a foundational AI platform and it's all based on the API, maybe. But we'll see where that goes. I think that the long-term play in the enterprise, to your point, is a lot dicier for them.
Yeah, and with OpenAI, I feel like the real innovation that happened was simply being able to put AI into a chatbot that worked fairly well. GPT, I do think is one of the most revolutionary technologies of our 21st century so far. It is amazing in what it does, but you can't overstate what it does. It's not unfailing. It's not factually accurate in all these ways. And at this point, every other generative AI company has caught up. They have a similar interface. So when you're trying to use Anthropic or Cohere or all the open source models, you can find a way to interface that is very similar to what GPT does, both on the chat side and on the API side. So there's no technological advantage and nothing that keeps you in. There's no unfair advantage that GPT has at this point, other than having first mover advantage and high adoption, which obviously help, but they aren't enough to make it through the long haul. So yeah, I'm interested in seeing what happens as OpenAI starts having to figure out what it does as a platform. And I feel like this is the enterprise sales goes so far from OpenAI's initial mission to basically do good for humanity and work on this general artificial intelligence, which whatever you think about that, those lofty goals are very different from creating an enterprise technology that drives $1 million sales.
Well, and I think that's my big concern with this is I think that this represents at least the risk of a loss of focus, because it can be such a huge distraction, and I think they're probably better served as really focusing on that initial mission. But to your point, it is shocking with, as you say, as so revolutionary as this technology is, as so incredibly complex. I just spent a little time really sort of digging into RAG, right, and really kind of getting into understanding how that works. And
Yes.
this stuff is so flipping complex, and yet it is also becoming so rapidly commoditized. I mean, I don't know if you got it. Again, this wasn't even on our list. I don't know how does Elon Musk companies like Grok. I don't know how it's Grok
Rock.
1.5.
Yeah.
The new the new one, and the benchmarks are all over the place. So who knows who to believe? But according to it, right, it is performing at equal levels to Cloud 3 and GPT-4, and there's speculation he's going to also release it in the open source model. So I mean, it's like it is so flipping competitive. We just talked about Databricks just the other day. So yeah, I do think it's a tough space to be in. There's so much money, and I think the business models are still very unproven. So as an enterprise exec, I'm looking at this and I'm really hedging my bets, and that's why I do think the Microsoft angles or some of these others we're going to talk about. I think AWS is doing some smart ways and approaches that those I think are going to be. I mean, they're so much more entrenched in the enterprise already. They have to go build up enterprise sales teams and all of the other stuff. So
Yeah.
we'll see how this plays out, but it is definitely wild west days still.
Yeah, one of the talking points that amused me in the Wall Street Journal article is Bell Lin outright pretty much asked the OpenAI executive, "Aren't people hedging their bet on AI because this is such a new market?" And of course, the OpenAI person said, "No, that's not what we see at all." Because of course, he had to say that as based on OpenAI's current market position. But yes, the reality is exactly what you said, Charles. That we should be hedging our bets, especially since honestly the initial cost of using a new model, or at least from an introductory perspective, is almost zero. There's no real problem with opening one account with each model that exists, or creating one API call and testing it out in some experimental fashion. That is table stakes and very easy to do. So there's almost no reason not to have a little AI lab if you're an IT department of any reasonable size.
Well, and that's the thing too. I mean, from a individual productivity, which is again where kind of the current approach is I use something called Raycast, and it's
Mhm.
AI. So I canceled my OpenAI subscription and signed up with Raycast, and part of the reason is that I can choose. I can literally it's a little drop down if I'm using ChatGPT 4, if I'm using Claude 3, if I'm using I don't remember. I think it's got like 5 of them now. I think Mistral's in there. I mean, and so,
Mhm.
like to your point, I mean, it is totally commoditized, and it's like they're battling over these nuances of these benchmarks, which again are not independently verified by anybody really. And so they're putting these benchmarks out there, and they're so technical. It's like, okay. So I do think it's a really challenging space right now from the enterprise perspective. And to your point, I think everyone is hedging their bets.
Yeah, I
So,
think these
anyway, I think we'll
model
probably beat
the
this.
model performance is really hard to judge. So my brother Leonard, he's actually a legal product manager, and he spends a lot of time actually benchmarking these models because he's trying to figure out what to use for the products that he's building. And it does get very technical. It's basically like these TPC database measurements where you're measuring data warehouse performance, and all those measures are also so technical that basically at the end of the day we're basically saying yes, well, what is the TPC H100 numbers like, and I don't even know what that number stands for. I just know that we are looking at these two numbers to compare, call it
Higher is better, right?
Amazon versus Teradata versus Google versus Cloudera versus Databricks versus whatever, and we're just hoping that the number is good enough, but nobody really knows what the number stands for other than, yeah, we did like 100 different tests that are all designed to do something.